Every generation produces fighters who leave people amazed, but very few names have carried the same weight across decades like Bruce Lee. Even today, when modern mixed martial arts has evolved into a global sport with advanced training methods, science-driven nutrition, and countless hours of combat data, the question still burns in the minds of fans: how good was Bruce Lee really? Could he have held his own against today's martial artists, or was he simply ahead of his time in ideas but not in actual fighting level? To answer this, we need to break down Bruce Lee's physical abilities, his philosophy, his unique training approach, and how those skills might translate in today's combat world. By doing so, we can fairly evaluate his fighting level compared to today's professionals, while also understanding why his name still echoes louder than almost anyone else's. Bruce Lee in context: what fighting looked like in his era. To compare Bruce Lee with today's martial artists, we first need to understand the fighting landscape of his time. Bruce Lee lived in the 1960s and early 70s, a period when martial arts outside of Asia were still cloaked in mystery. Karate had just begun spreading in the West. Kung Fu schools were rare, and combat sports like boxing and wrestling dominated in the United States. At that time, martial arts styles were usually rigid. Karate practitioners trained mostly in katas and point fighting. Kung Fu fighters relied heavily on forms rather than sparring. Judo was popular, but it was more about throws and less about striking. There was no widespread culture of cross-training. Fighters were often limited to the rules and methods of their chosen art. This is where Bruce Lee was revolutionary. He openly challenged the idea of one fixed style being superior, and he insisted that fighters must be versatile. He criticized traditional martial arts for being trapped in ritual and patterns, famously calling them the classical mess. In many ways, he anticipated the future of MMA decades before the first UFC event. But while his philosophy was ahead of its time, philosophy alone does not win fights. To measure his level, we must also examine his physicality skills and what he demonstrated. Physical attributes, the engine of his fighting ability. Bruce Lee was not a large man, standing around 5 feet 7 inches and weighing about 135 to 145 pounds. In today's combat sports, this would place him in the featherweight or lightweight divisions. But despite his relatively small frame, his physical capabilities were extraordinary, almost legendary. His speed was one of his defining weapons. Eyewitnesses often recalled that his movements were so fast they could barely be seen. Many demonstrations show him punching and retracting his hand before an opponent could even react. Even boxing champions who watched him, such as Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali, praised his incredible quickness. Power was another area where Bruce shocked people. His 1-inch punch remains iconic not just for eye